I promise that you will come back to this video if you work in AI systems. You see, there's a problem with AI systems that almost nobody is talking about right now, but it's very important. And I'm coining it the AI mind virus. To illustrate kind of what it is, I'm going to start with my first encounter with the mind virus. So I have a large Rust code base that I've been working on for months. And I noticed that the main file kept growing and growing and growing. And each time an agent would add a new feature, it would add it to the main file instead of making that new feature a different file. Now, this is bad practice in code. This is known as a God object. And I realized that the reason that they did this was because the file was already so big and had so many features in it. In other words, the agents had caught the mind virus. So the mind virus, in a broad sense, refers to when an AI will adapt to its environment and create more of the same. So in my example, what happened to me was it saw a God object and created more of the same. But this actually happened with a lot of different things. For example, duplicated code in my code base, it did that too. Spaghetti dependencies, it did that too. And so it's this idea that if the AI sees something, it will mimic it because the AI repeats what it sees. And this doesn't just apply to code, it applies to writing as well. So this can be a huge problem because if there's anything that goes wrong, you'll notice that it will keep going wrong. And anything new that you build on top of it will not only be built on top of bad code, but the code itself that the agents make will be bad. This can apply to writing a book as well. If the AI wrote the book in a poor way, for example, the first page, the previous AIs would read that and write terribly again. So you see that this is a self-perpetuating cycle, and it can really spread like a virus to an entire AI system. The worst part about this is, if you're trying to clean this up, the AI agents now have to fight this mind virus because they're viewing code that's written a certain way and you're telling them they need to write it a different way. You have to keep reinforcing that, and it can be very hard to fight against, especially if the virus has really built up in the system. And one infected file can still steer agents in the future if you miss it. So you might be thinking, okay, that's for code bases, right? Well, no, it's not just for code bases. It's also for any writing on the internet. And I think this is very pertinent here because we've gotten to a place now where more content on the internet is written by AI than by humans. And also, bot traffic is more pervasive than human traffic on the internet. So I think you can see where this is going, right? This trend is probably not going to stop at 50%. It's probably going to creep up and creep up, in a couple years, it might be 70, let's say. And this trend of bots versus humans is probably going to very slowly creep up as well. The point being, more of the internet is going to be used by AI agents and bots, and more of the internet is going to be created by AI agents and bots. And so the more we use AI to create code, text, image, video, and all the other stuff that we have, the more things are susceptible to this kind of mind virus that I talked about. So let's get practical. The three main methods to avoid the mind virus are as follows. Number one, this is the most important. Check your agent's work early and often. Do not run your agents on full autopilot all the time without ever checking their code or their behavior or any of that stuff. So in my case, for example, I noticed that the file was getting quite large, the main file, when I was looking through it. And so that was a red flag to me. I'm like, okay, why is it so large? And when I asked my agent why it was so large, it was like, well, you have a bunch of features in there. And I was like, oh shit. And so that's when I kind of realized, right? So if I had caught that earlier, though, if I had caught it at like 10,000 lines, well, that would have been less cleanup down the line, right? And so I had to spend a lot of tokens and a lot of time cleaning up the code base. It would have been a lot easier if I had caught it early. So checking your agent's work early and often is a really good practice. And if you can start off your system with healthy practices, right? Let's go back here, right? AI copies its environment. So if you can start off with clean code, modular design, clear boundaries, etc., it's going to keep writing code with good practices. as opposed to writing code with bad practices. And that goes for writing code and, written text, all that jazz. So not only check your agent's work early and often, but correct the system early and often. Because if the system is correct early on, if you catch the mind virus early, it's a lot easier to correct. The second thing is to reinforce your rules everywhere. So the way I did this was I put the best practices in the agents.md and had the agents read it every time their context compacted. I had a hook for that. I also put the purpose of the project in the README. So I actually stumbled on that by mistake because I put it in there because I wanted the README to be descriptive. But what ended up actually happening as a side benefit was the agents would read the README to figure out what the project was about, and then they would keep that in mind when they're writing code. So they would make sure that when they're writing code, they're keeping in mind security. Reinforcing your rules in the code, in the README, in whatever guides you have, the skills that you're giving your agents, all that stuff, anything that your agent is ingesting, ideally is pushing it towards what you want, not just the prompts, right? So that's very important. And then finally, if you do catch any sort of mind virus type of behavior, ruthlessly remove any writing or code or any other content, images, video, what have you, that reinforces the bad behavior. Because as we covered before, right, any infected files that are left over can come back and corrupt any agent that reads them and gets that in its context. Think of it like prompt injection, but it's not intentional prompt injection. It's just the agent reads the file that was made improperly and it corrupts it. Finally, I want to cover what I think the future holds for the mind virus. Now, these are my predictions for how things are going to go. So, as agents build more systems, which I firmly believe they will, you will see this happening increasingly more and with the entire internet as a canvas. What do I mean by that? Well, as we saw, agents are creating basically the entire internet. And the more of the internet they create, the more opportunities there are to embed mind virus type of behavior in there, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So that's something that I think we're going to see more and more systems are built by the agents. Intentionally and unintentionally leads me to my next prediction, which is you will likely see this used as a form of cyber attack. Why do I say that? Well, when it comes to prompt injection, if you saw my video on hacking Gandalf and trying out prompt injections, you know that it can be kind of challenging and those have been protected against, right? If you write a prompt where you tell the agent to give you passwords and stuff like that, a lot of protections have been made around that now, for good reason. However, it's a lot easier to prompt an agent to be more careful and to write a whole bunch of tests that are going to slow it down and to get it to write code that it sounds reasonable to the agent, but really it's just going to screw it up. There are a few different types of cyber attacks, and stealing passwords is one. Some cyber attacks are really just based around fucking shit up. And that's the type of cyber attack that could happen here. For this, I imagine like an open source project where you submit a pull request or a suggestion or a comment and an agent automatically reads it and decides, oh, you know what? I'm going to write code like that. I'm going to write a bunch of comments throughout the code that tell it to do this and that and check for this and that. And what'll happen is that could slow the entire thing down, right? The entire system down and just make it unworkable and create the mind virus, except done on purpose. Lastly, I predict that whole companies will be formed around solving this problem. Now, in fairness, this isn't entirely a prediction because I've actually talked to people who own companies that are kind of solving this exact problem in a way. I talked to somebody who is paid millions of dollars to basically refactor old code bases that are really hard for agents and humans to untangle. So he's already making money by solving this mind virus problem. But I predict that this is going to become more and more common because agents are going to write more and more code. They're going to be embedded in more and more systems and create more and more of the internet. So as we see this line start to tick up, I think that this is going to be a huge opportunity for the people that are solving this problem. So that's the mind virus. It's a little bit of a complex concept to understand, but if you understand it, you really are far ahead because I have not seen a lot of people talking about AI this way. And the reason I said you would come back to this video later is because I predict that a lot of people will be talking about AI this way going forward as they realize, oh shit, this is a really good way to describe what's happening here, and it can be a really big problem. So remember to follow the practices that I told you to avoid the mind virus in any of the AI systems that you built. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and stay safe out there.